Welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we're back to have another conversation, this time about the future of beef. Beef is a controversial topic for a lot of our readers and listeners, as is all meat. And I want to say before we start that this is not an endorsement of buying more meat, but it is a conversation about how we can be more sustainable if, in fact, people are choosing to buy meat. So if you do not eat animals and you object to this, I urge you to please keep an open mind. This is for a conversation for folks who are trying to make improvements. And let's hope that they get to the point where they're not eating as much meat, or at least not eating meat that is raised in a way that is damaging the planet. And the ethical concerns is something that we're going to put aside for the purpose of this conversation, because we do want to get to that kind of improvement. Now, our guest today is Scott Lively, the co-founder of the largest organic and grass-fed beef producer in the United States. It's called Raise American. He's also the author of a new book, For the Love of Beef, the Good, the Bad, and the Future of America's Favorite Meat. He makes the case that a more sustainable meat industry can solve many of the environmental issues associated with concentrated animal feeding operations, which are known as CAFOs. CAFOs produce about 85% of the steak and hamburger in the United States. And the key here, according to Scott, is to move towards more grass-fed and humanely raised and distributed production of beef around the country. Now, America has a massive appetite for beef. It's a $111 billion a year industry that accounts for almost 5.4 million jobs. And Americans, on average, consume 57 pounds of beef per year. Scott's book also details the many misleading marketing claims made around beef, from the vague use of terms like organic and Angus, that are often used to justify higher costs. And the book is a useful guide to seeing through marketing claims about beef and explains some potential paths to a less harmful meat industry. You can find out more about Scott's beef business at raiseamerican.com. That's all one word, raiseamerican.com. And For the Love of Beef is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other local bookstores. Welcome to the show, Scott. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. Doing great.
Well, good. I'm glad you're here. Now, as I said in the intro, many in our audience object to the whole practice of killing animals. And I personally have cut down my meat consumption pretty substantially as a way of lowering my carbon footprint. Got to say, I still like beef and would love to have a more sustainable way to eat it sometimes. Now, you dedicated only a few hundred words to your book about the concept of lab-grown meats and meat alternatives. So what I want to start off by asking you is, why is it still necessary to raise and slaughter cattle when it is potentially possible to start to replace this form of protein?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, and it's an endeavor that I'm just starting in the last month or so to research and dig into. I don't think the concept of lab-grown meat is particularly a bad thing, and I think it's based on a very principled idea. I think the idea of lowering carbon emissions and reducing the amount of animals on feed is a good thing. I think the issue is now it's vastly expensive. No one's proven an economically viable way to do this. You have to remember, as much as there's a huge movement in plant-based foods, and people are absolutely reducing their meat intake. There's this group that aren't vegetarians. They're called flexitarians, where they either become a lot less inclined to want to eat red meat, and they're blending it with other things, and they've just reduced their consumption. But with that, there's also still over 80 million people that eat meat every day. Right. And I don't mean that eat meat. I mean eat it every day. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge part of our population that eat beef on a daily basis, whether it's a hamburger or whatever it's lasagna or steak. That's just a massive part of our population. So I think right now there's no economic way for lab-grown meat to feed the masses. It's a nice idea, and I think everyone that's doing it, I really believe they have principal causes. I have a lot of questions and thoughts about just how's it done. I don't know enough about it. I know that there obviously has to be amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks for protein, and there has to be a protein string that beef is growing around, that meat is growing around, and that meat has to be fed something. So what is it being fed and how is it growing? And I just think there's a lot of unanswered questions.
I look forward to having a conversation with you after you learn more about that, because I have been involved through various endeavors over the past 20, 25 years in some early examples of trying to grow human organs for medical use.
Yeah.
For replacements. And I think that the technology, as you say, is very early, but is very promising, and it'll be interesting to watch as it grows. But let's talk about, as going forward from where we are today, the reality of today. How can we be more sustainable? And one of the things you really don't go easy on in the book is corn. Now, tell us about the role corn plays in having achieved the scale of beef production that we see globally at this time.
Well, corn was one of those beautiful crops that, during the 40s, that after World War II ended, we had a surplus of it. There was a lot of corn going around. Grain is what builds nations, and corn was plentiful, and the prices were down. It was really cheap. And ranchers figured out quickly, I guess I would say, and big packers who have a vested interest figured quickly, that you could grind corn and crush corn. And it was an incredible cheap gain. It's full of sugar and starch, and it's great. And it just gets an animal fat quick. So when we started feeding corn to cattle, and it started realizing the results would be impactful, but flavorful, fat, quick gain meat, people were addicted to it. At that same time, to raise corn prices, the government started a CRP program. And what that was is conservation reserve program, where they were paying ranchers to take chunks of land, thousands of acres, out of production to not farm it, to put it into conservation reserve, and paying them a per acre price. Well, that also increased the bushel of corn cost. So it became an addictive thing, and it became incredibly easy, but it's really not what these ruminants, these bovines, were meant to eat. I mean, if they were meant to eat it, you wouldn't have to grind it down and crush it into nothing. You would actually just be able to eat it right off the cob, or however they eat it. And they literally have to take this corn and almost emulsify it and mix it with silage and mix it with hay to get the cow to eat it. So my point is this: is that it's not helping our cause, overfeeding of corn. It's not helping the health of the animal, and it's not helping the health of you. And I really believe that there is I'm not going to say a simple, but there's a path to profitability in the beef industry of taking these CRP acreage that have been set aside to not farm, turn them into pasture land, raising cattle, and stop using the amount of corn we use. Like you said, for you still eat beef occasionally. You haven't cut it out completely.
I'm a flexitarian.
So I'm a meat eater. I eat meat probably 2 or 3 times a week, but not every day. I actually go multiple days without eating beef. And I would say I still eat conventional beef. I still have the prime ribeye occasionally, but when I do it, it's an occasion. It's dessert for me. It's not my daily intake. It's an indulgence.
That's a really interesting point that comes up throughout the book. You keep referring back, and I think you remember the times I do, when meat was really a luxury at the home, and usually, many families only ate it once a week, and it was a big deal. That also suggests that if we move toward a different production and distribution model, that we could potentially recalibrate the impact of the industry on the environment. One of the claims you make in the book is that the meat industry produces no waste because every part of the animal, including the blood, is used for something. And the logical extension of that argument is that we can make beef more efficient. And in the final chapter, you describe a more distributed, localized meat supply based on new feeds like seaweed and clover, which would address the ruminant stomach that a cow has instead of in a better way. If we did that, how much could we reduce methane emissions associated with beef? And what would that world look like?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of speculation out there, but I would say this, that I know there's a study in the UK, and I wish I would have pulled it up before this because I'd love to cite it. And I will forward it to you after this call, that proved you could reduce bovine emissions by over 70% by feeding dehydrated seaweed. And proved it that because all the emissions of methane for a cow comes out its mouth. They belch it. They don't. Right. Everyone thinks it comes out the other end. It doesn't. They belch that emissions, and it's not coming past the first stomach. So there are 4 stomachs in this animal. So if we could reduce that by 70%, if that's accurate, and that, that has not been looked at as a macro basis, it's only been looked at as a, very controlled experiment in the UK, that would be a massive change. The other thing, in addition to reducing methane and reducing carbon, it's how do you get nitrogen-rich soil rejuvenated? So regenerative farming is the thing we need to really look at, is we can use these animals that are natural grazers, eating multiple types of grass out there, actually enriching the soil and creating a much better topsoil and a much deeper, nutrient-rich, carbon-infused soil. We want carbon in the ground, not in the air. We want to use it to grow things. And so I think if you started taking these large plots of land, and there's 3-4 million acres of them that are being paid not to farm, and incentivized and paid that same amount of money to turn them into pasture land for sustainable regenerative farming, you could probably, in addition to removing the methane output from the seaweed and putting 25 to 30% of our feed into grass fed, you could probably reduce the emissions of the cattle ridiculously amounts that was unmeasurable. I mean, it would be huge.
Well, and so would meat in that environment be more dear? Would it be more expensive, or would it simply be more sustainable?
So I always have this saying that I've been saying this for 15 years. So if you can't pay for it, it's not sustainable. Okay. If the farmer can't make a living, and if you can't sell the meat for more than it costs you to raise it, it's not sustainable. So industry always finds a way. Big business always finds a way. The big packers have gotten into organic farming, or organic beef, I should say, heavily in the last 10 years, because there's a market for it. Consumers all of a sudden started saying, hey, I want the USDA organic symbol on my meat. It's an emotional buy. It feels good. When the consumer starts saying things like, I want grass-fed and I want verified grass-fed, there's no legal definition for grass-fed in America. That's the problem. Okay. But when the consumer starts demanding this, I guarantee you, big beef will answer, because they're feeding, 85% of the beef that comes from these 4 packers. When the consumer starts, listen, I'm going to scale back. I'm not going to eat meat at all unless it's grass fed, even if it's slightly macro produced. If you could find a way to do it a little more regeneratively, where you're actually proving to me, maybe the USDA needs to come out with USDA regenerative certified instead of organic certified, and prove to the consumer you're doing something different. That's what's going to move the needle here.
So is Raise American not big beef? How would you characterize what your role in the industry would be if in fact big beef started to make that pivot?
I would say we're a tiny fraction of the industry. Grass-fed beef is somewhere between 1% and 2% of the entire industry, and where the average big packer can kill over I should say harvest, slaughter, whatever you want to say. Let's tell it what it is.
Let's be blunt. They're killing them.
Killing animals. Let's be honest. Yeah. Where they kill, 10,000 animals in a day, and some of them can do several thousand in an hour. We kill 1,000 a week. So we're really small compared to the industry. We have a very small pool of cattle producers we pull from, and we have an incredibly rigid certification program to get onto our platform of being able to provide beef. So it's not something we can just do overnight. And we're small, and we'll probably stay solid and small. We're feeding a very specific demographic, and it's working for us. So we're the furthest thing from big beef.
Okay. So let's talk about those labels that you just mentioned. So the FDA regulation of organic, and the label came into being in the 1990 Organic Foods Production Act. What are the requirements for meat to be labeled organic?
Yeah, no, that's a great question and a simple one. The easiest is as follows. There are probably a couple others that I might miss, but they have to have no antibiotics can be used in the animal, feed or otherwise. If the animal's sick, you have to give an antibiotic, but you remove it from your program.
Right. So it's no longer organic.
Yeah, exactly. You can sell it as all natural, which is surprising, but you can't sell it as USDA organic.
Well, that's second thing is silly and ridiculous, but let's go on.
I know. No added growth hormones. So all bovines have hormones. You and I have hormones. So you can't say no hormones. It's no added hormones. They can't put hormones and chips and implement things that have this animal grow at a irregular rate. So no added hormones, no antibiotics. The animal has to eat organic feed its entire life. And the mother, this is an interesting, very, very interesting, somewhat controversial standard. During the third trimester, and cows have the same gestation period as humans, 9 months. During the third trimester, the mother has to be on organic feed during her last trimester. And while the calf is being weaned, the mother has to be on organic feed, organic pasture. Now, after that, the calf goes off to a feeding regime, goes on to pasture, goes on to eat wherever it does, and moves on. It's weaned from its mother. The mother goes back into general population. She's not organic, and she can never be sold as organic, but she can still birth organic calves, provided she's treated organically during her last trimester for the rest of her life.
Okay, so now let's talk about grass-fed. There's a label, or at least it's used in labeling. What does it mean? Does it mean it's only fed grass for its entire life?
No, there's two really standard definitions for grass-fed. All cows eat grass. So therefore, every cow, McDonald's hamburger could say it's grass-fed, because at one time, that cow ate grass. Now, was it grass-fed and grass-finished? Was it 100% grass-fed? There, we start to dig into the attributes that are really unique. If you see grass-fed, grass-finished, you should be comfortable that it was probably an affidavit or some type of a legal document that producer had to show to prove that animal was grass finished, that it basically never spent time in a feed yard eating grain, corn, or soybean, that it was always on grass its entire life.
Okay.
But because there's no legal definition, there's a lot of grass-fed beef out there that it says grass-fed, but during the last 90 days, they might pump it full with some grain, some soy, some corn, get it fed. So they finish it, and what that does is it adds a flavor, it adds a marble, it gives that consumer what they're used to seeing and feeling, and you still legally can put the grass-fed claim on there, but at the same time, it's not 100%
really grass-fed. Yeah. Now, so I think this is the most important one to look for, and I don't think many consumers are aware of the country of origin label, or COOL label, but meat shipped halfway around the world is meat that carries a huge carbon footprint compared even to just regularly farmed.
Massive.
Why don't we see that more prominently advertised in labeling?
Really, this is one of my biggest contentions with the conventional beef industry is what a strong lobbying group they are. That, I think it was 2016, the country of origin labeling rules for beef and pork were just quietly removed, literally overnight, in a spending bill that had nothing to do with agriculture. It was nothing to do with it. And what that did, now we still have country of origin for fish, for lamb, for all of our produce, seafood. But when it comes to beef and pork, they get an exemption. You don't have to declare the country it came from. And you've got meat being shipped from Australia, Uruguay, New Zealand, obviously from Canada and Mexico, all over the world, shipped into the US. And as long as they do anything to it, slightly further process, if you could bring trimmings, you could bring, fat, lean trim that's half 85, 15, 90, 10, grind it into hamburger, and you can legally today put product of the USA on it. Now, listen, I'm a big fan of country of origin. I think you should put the country of everything, on everything. But the fact that you're allowed to go the extra step and put product of the USA, even if you cut it into steaks here, is just, to me, it's like, you've got to be kidding me. That is just straight up customer deception.
Okay, so there's one more customer deception, and this one I think everybody assumes that really means something. Tell us what Angus actually means.
So there's various levels of it. If you go to the American Angus, which is a company, this is an LLC, this is a brand. They license their name. They make money putting Angus on things. So certified Angus beef is basically the animal's got to be 51% black or more.
Outside, just.
Yeah. So if you had a mostly
black, 50%, and that's an Angus cow, which means nothing genetic.
Yeah. Now I guess there's levels, and I might be screwing these up, and I hope the Angus Association doesn't slaughter me here. No pun intended, but contains Angus attributes is a level, and there's pure Angus, which is another level. But to be certified Angus beef, you just have to be 51% black or more. So if I had a dairy cow that was 4 or 5 years old, that was mostly black, according to their definition, that would qualify.
Okay, well, then now there are several seals and certifications that you talked about as well. So let's go through a couple of those. Certified, humane, raised, and handled.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And does it mean that the slaughtering process is any less grisly?
You know, I'm going to make a blanket statement of all these label claims, because I think there was a time when they all had good intentions and somebody said, hey, I want to prove my animals are certified humane, my animals are non-GMO project verified, they become businesses in themselves, and they make a lot of money selling that certification to put on a label.
Right.
I'm not saying they're bad or wrong, but I've seen a lot of producers get certifications when no one's visited the ranch, no one's audited anything, no one's visited the plant to see how slaughter's done. And if you're just doing it based on a testimonial or a one-page affidavit from whoever's putting their name on the label, I think that just begs question. I think if these certifications really want to be legitimate and valid, they need to have tighter audits and controls and really get down to the granular level and visit the facility, visit the ranch, visit the producer, and do, surprise audits, do non-announced inspections. I think the American Grass-Fed Association is very careful who they give their certification to. You don't see that all over the place because it's a tough certification to get. They want to prove it, know it, believe it. And they're going to come look at you, look at your ranch. They're going to watch the way you feed. They're going to count your noses and make sure you have 500 head and not 10, you're not selling 10,000, head of beef. It's so.
How often do they come to your facilities? Do you have a general sense of that?
I really don't know exactly, the producers would do that. But we are grass-fed verified, but we are not American Grass-Fed certified. We have not gone through that process. We have over 6,000 animals on feed on any given month, and we haven't had a chance to do that. It's a goal, and I'd love to get there. But I'm giving them an endorsement, and I'm also giving us an excuse. Their requirements are so stringent, it would take us so long to do that it's just not something we can do today. But I want to get there, and I want to get there as soon as possible.
Now, one of the last things I want to talk about is all those people who work in the slaughterhouse industry. About 5.4 million people around the country are involved in the beef production industry in specific. And they have job titles that really strike me as being similar to buggy whip maker. Okay. Do you see a future for live hangers, pelt droppers, animal stunners as we transition to a more fully grass-fed local meat industry? Does it become something that people all they do all day long is stand up to their ankles in blood, but it is one facet of a more dynamic and potentially rewarding existence?
Yeah. So that's one of the best questions I'm going to say I've honestly ever been asked. And I love talking about the welfare of employees. And that's a phenomenal question. So the problem we have is economics. The big beef packers, like, the JBS, Cargill, National Beef, Tyson, they have so much money. Their automation at the plant level is so technical. It's so advanced. They have a way of stunning the animal without anyone even touching it. They have a way of removing the blood without very little intervention from humans. It's almost becoming robotic. And they have ways of keeping the animal calm that are surprisingly advanced. Hide removal that is, clean, that doesn't, flap any dirt or fecal matter from the hide onto the carcass, and then carcass wash from these Chad cabinets that sprays a steam bath on it and cleans it.
That was an interesting segment. I wasn't aware of the role of apple cider vinegar.
Yeah. It's the apple cider vinegar. We use that to clean carcasses. It's crazy. And it works. It's interesting. So the larger the plant, the more automated, and the less people touching your meat, the cleaner and safer it is from a food safety point of view. So I think there would be a great time where you wouldn't have guys actually sticking a knife in the jugular and draining the blood, like which happens at most packing houses that are smaller, where you have people less involved and less hands on the food. I think is safer food. But the smaller the packing house, the more bodies and the more hands you're going to have touching that meat. And it's a little bit of a I call it a yin and yang. You've got bigger plants probably do it better, faster, and cleaner, and actually maybe even more humane. I'm not just saying that. Smaller plants are doing it the old-fashioned way because they don't have the money, they don't have the innovation, they don't have the technology to process 1,000 head an hour, and that's what they're doing at the big plants. So, look, can you sacrifice sustainable local agriculture for food safety? That's a question we got to ask ourselves, because I got to say the big plants keep meat really clean and safe. They keep it cold, they keep it moving, they keep it, they just keep it clean. The little plants, they're going to have a lot more of a challenge with food safety, because I'm not saying the meat's bad or unsafe. I mean, we're a small plant. It's just we don't have the access to tens of millions of dollars in equipment to process meat the way the big guys do. And when you're selling millions of pounds of hamburger a week, you better make clean meat. You got liability issues there.
Well, and in a sense, we've circled all the way back to the initial part of the conversation, which is at some point, if lab grown or other forms of meat alternatives rise and complement this industry, traditionally grown beef could play an important role. There's still all of the ethical issues that are individual choices. Let's just put it that way.
I agree.
That suggest that there is a different role for the beef industry to play. And so this is my last question. I love how these conversations come to full circle. Obviously, we need to lower the environmental footprint of our beef industry, and we have a national goal of reducing our carbon footprint by 50% by 2030. Is there any chance that the beef industry will be able to get there?
I got to tell you, I'm only speaking from one of the big packers. I'm not speaking for them because I have nothing to do with them and I'm not involved with them. And I have no economic financial ties to JBS. But I will say, when I've spoken to individuals at JBS and I've heard their plan and seen their plan, if they can actually do it, it will make an impact. Their sustainability initiative and their carbon reduction initiative goes beyond just feeding dehydrated seaweed, which everyone's going to start doing, I hope, very small amounts of this. It won't be expensive, but they're looking at solar, at plants. They're looking at water waste. Their plan's beautiful. And is it just responding to the market? I don't know. Is it just, hey, look at us, I don't know the sincerity of it, but I'm saying if it's real and they can execute it, it will make a massive impact in the environmental footprint of what they do.
Well, I hope that you encourage them to include that kind of information in their labeling and not just in their annual system.
Yeah, I should. When I talk to those guys, and I have friends there, this is not economics. I'm just sharing ideas and stuff. And I wrote the book and I sent copies of the book to a couple of executives over there. I'm like, they should put that on their label. They should talk about that. And maybe they're not there yet. Maybe they haven't done enough of it where they feel they're comfortable validating it. But I got to say, their plan, if it's real, it'll make an impact. And I hope the other big packers follow suit.
Well, Scott, I want to thank you for taking time to talk with us today. It's been fascinating.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that question about employees and their titles. I'm going to ponder that. I might even get back to you with some thoughts. And that was a really good question.
Let's talk again. Look, the fact is that many ordinary Americans, many ordinary people all over the world are stuck in jobs that don't help the planet. And we need to get them out of those.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was a great interview. I really appreciate your time.
We've been talking with Scott Lively, who's the co-founder of Raise American. It's the largest organic and grass-fed beef producer in the United States, and also author of For the Love of Beef, The Good, the Bad, and the Future of America's Favorite Meat. And I think you'll agree, Scott's got an interesting perspective. Now, for those of you who have an ethical concern, I again remind all of us that we have our own decisions to make. And I hope that we recognize that the journey to perfection is a different path for everybody. And folks, please take some time to share this podcast and others that we do at Earth911 with everyone, because getting these ideas out there and starting to cross the different wires that are currently separate in this economy and get them thinking about how collaboratively we can start to change the environmental impact and the social outcomes of our economy. It's important that we do this. So please share. This is Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we're going to be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.